Respectfully, you've changed the subject very quickly from where we were a moment
No,
ago.
no,
which
I haven't
is
changed the
what
subject.
we want to do. No, because what we were talking about was family policy and the question of whether we should try to get more support to your typical working class household, or whether we should be concerned that they're not paying high enough taxes.
Right.
And shifting to
I
the
am
hang on a second.
one issue that American Compass has done quite a bit of work on is the child tax credit. And there was just a recent editorial in the Wall Street Journal examining the effect of the child tax credit. And so I wonder, in your mind, Oren, is the child tax credit a successful policy? And how do we avoid subsidizing dysfunctional arrangements associated with worse outcomes for children, such as the prevalence of one-parent households, declining marriage rates, and so on?
So I think the child tax credit has been a very successful policy in terms of what it's intended to do, which is get relatively more resources to families that are raising children. And I think that's something that we should want to do, because we should recognize that the act of raising children has tremendous value, that it's something we need a lot of, and frankly, a lot more of than we have in our economy and in our nation. And that in recent decades, one of the major economic trends has been markets shifting in ways that make it harder to do that. And so we need public policies that are going to push the other direction. I think the problem with the child tax credit, as we've structured it, is that we've treated it as tax policy. And particularly on the right of center, the attitude has been essentially, well, we want to give families a tax cut. And that's fine. It's nice to give families a tax cut. The problem is that how high your tax liability isn't really a very good proxy for how much support we might actually want to get to you. And so the quintessential, working class household that might have income of $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 a year just doesn't pay enough federal taxes to begin with to enjoy the full benefit of the child tax credit. And so what a lot of folks on the right of center have said is, well, tough. This is for people who are paying higher taxes. But if the actual goal is to say we want to find those families that have been most hurt by recent economic trends, that would benefit most from the support, and to be clear, are doing the right thing, they are working, they are raising kids, they're just having trouble making ends meet, then doing this as tax policy and saying, well, you get less of a benefit because you're earning less money, is exactly backward. And so that's why what we proposed at American Compass is to say, what we should have is what we would call a family benefit, that looks a lot more like Social Security. So Social Security doesn't just go to anybody. You have to have worked and paid in to receive it. But it's intended in effect to be a payment that's very generous for folks who might otherwise have trouble making ends meet. And so we would say, we're not going to pay you more of a benefit than what you're earning yourself. So if you're not working, you can't receive the benefit. But if you're a household that's very low income, let's make sure that you get the full value of the benefit, and that could be very large. That could be $10,000, $15,000 a year for a family raising 2 or 3 kids, which would obviously make a tremendous difference. But to your point about incentives, I would say the incentives there are all to the good. It only comes to you if you are also working to support yourself, and so it certainly doesn't discourage work. It might discourage someone from taking a third job or working a crazy number of hours because it's helping them make ends meet. But I think that's exactly what we should want. The principle should be that we're doing everything we can to help a family to help parents raise a family on a single income.
Yes, I think to me, I'm skeptical of some policies like this because we've got a massive distortion as is, which is that the left is very skilled at securing patronage windfalls for their voting blocks, their client class. And we've, on the right, kind of done a bad job of responding in kind and securing patronage windfalls for our clients, our voting blocks. And to me, reading between the lines, the child tax credit as it exists is an attempt at doing that, which is we have a major distortion in our economy as is, which is that something like 60% of households like don't pay like a federal income tax or something. They don't make enough to do that, whether they're working or not. I don't remember exactly what the number is, but when Senator Rick Scott came out with his platform and said, more people should be paying taxes, he got hit from a lot of sides for that, but I agreed with him. And I said, look, if you've got a situation where like less than half of the households are paying the taxes for everyone else, if you ran a business like that, it would fail. And so when I hear about expanding these types of, I guess it makes me even wonder, should that even be called a child tax credit? I mean, it's a form of, it's a payoff for people who are getting screwed, so they get less screwed. And in my mind, that is a good thing. But expanding it to the people who aren't even really like paying that much to begin with, I mean, you don't want to be punitive to them. You don't necessarily want their lives to be worse, but to me, it's really, really critical to be focused on the types of incentives that we're introducing, the distortions that we're creating with public policy. And further, when you look at these numbers, like 1/4 of children in America being raised in single parent households, these are objectively situations that are associated with worse outcomes for children. And so to me, just papering some of that over with a little more money for them to raise their children is actually not a good thing. It's creating worse incentives unless you have some way to attach the marriage incentive, whatever it is. I'm not an expert. I don't know how it works. But when we look at the sort of what is our ideal end state for the American economy, for the outcomes of some of these policies, my viewpoint is that it's a good thing when more people are married when they're raising their children. It's a good thing when you expand the proportion of people out there who are earning enough to pay taxes, rather than sort of looking at the people who aren't paying taxes and saying, gosh, you know what those people need? More public money shipped to them from the people who are still paying the taxes. I just worry about the distortions.
Well, there's a lot there. I guess I'll pick up on a couple of the points that I would want to address. One is, I think it's important to point out that everybody who's working is paying taxes. The payroll taxes for somebody starting from their first dollar, it's about 15% of income.
Right.
So the idea that we have people who aren't paying taxes, certainly among those who are working, I don't think is an especially effective critique. It's true that they're not necessarily paying a net progressive income tax on their earnings, but that's a policy decision that we've made as we look at the distribution of the income in the country and ask, who do we want to have, relatively speaking, funding public services? And so I think to your point that, you could never run a business this way, that's not true. We can raise the revenue we need from a variety of mixes. The reality is that where the real shortfall isn't on these low income households where you could say, in principle, we want $500 or $1,000 a year from you. Where all the money is, if you actually wanted to balance the budget and think about how are we going to fund our government, it's in the upper middle class. It's in everybody who's earning, $100,000 to $500,000 a year. And so I think it's really important when we talk about your typical, as we were at the beginning, your young male worker doesn't have a college degree. We'd like to see them, settling down, getting married, starting a family. Maybe they're earning $40,000 a year. Let's be concrete about it. How do we feel about that person in that situation? Are we saying that person is a freeloader who isn't doing enough and needs to be paying more in taxes so that somebody earning $150,000 a year, even though they're certainly not working any harder, so that person can pay less in taxes? I guess I'd put that to you. Is that your view, that we would have a better country and that it's a fairer system to say, let's reduce taxes slightly for the $150,000 a year household so that 27-year-old earning $40,000 a year at least has to send in that $1,000 check.
I guess the way I would put it is that you cannot keep squeezing the finite proportion of people who are expected to provide the windfall for everyone else. And what I'm referring to also is that we've got this huge and growing proportion of people who aren't working, and yet they're doing fine. So they're getting a lot of money from the government. And where is that money coming from? The increasingly squeezed and beleaguered portion of people in the economy who are earning and making enough to make it all happen for everybody else. And so I see it as unsustainable. I think it's unjust. I think it's not a good way to organize the economy. I think that to me, I don't understand why the first place we don't start with trying to make sure that people who are working, especially who are experiencing the hardest, the most difficulty with wage stagnation and other things, is why not just start with the deportation of the 30 million illegal people in our country? And to me, I don't understand why more people in Congress don't just start there, because you've got 30 million people or so. I mean, they say it's like 11 million, right? And they say like, we've got 11 million illegal immigrants in the country. But when you've got, people coming at this rate of 2 to 5 million every single year, it's obviously much higher than that. My personal estimate is 30 to 50 million illegal immigrants in the country. Obviously, many of these people are uptaking social services. Obviously, many of these people are working. They're doing something. There's a big mess, a big distortion in our country that comes from this like totally unmanaged element of both like labor market dynamics and social services dynamics. And I just really think that would be a great place to start if we want people to have better wages and to deal with some of our social services spending. But you never hear anyone in Congress talking about that.
Well, I agree with you that we need to do something about illegal immigration, but respectfully, you've changed the subject very quickly from where we were a moment ago.
No, I haven't changed the subject.
What we want to do. No, because what we were talking about was family policy and the question of whether we should try to get more support to your typical working class household, or whether we should be concerned that they're not paying high enough taxes.
Right.
And shifting to hang on a sec, Paige. Shifting to the question of people who aren't working is beside the point. The question in my mind on that topic is, how do we feel about that working class household earning $40,000 a year, which you're correct, they are not paying federal income taxes today. My understanding per the Rick Scott point was you were saying, yeah, we need to get those folks paying more federal income tax, not providing them more support. And I would say the opposite. And so that's what I wanted to understand your thinking on is for that working class household that is working, they're trying to make ends meet. You're correct, they don't have federal tax liability at the income tax level. Is that a problem? Do we need to find a way to get that household to pay more taxes? I would say no.
The reason I bring up the very, very, very high volumes of people living in the country illegally is because I think that dealing with that effectively would actually remove a lot of the wage pressures that are making it difficult for working class families to make more money. And that alone, I mean, a distortion of 30 million or so people, I would argue has a big effect on wages and other things. The reason I bring up the Senator Rick Scott thing with the people paying taxes is that I think it draws important attention to some of these distortions, that you've got a small and decreasing proportion of people in the economy who are being asked to fund a lot more things. And so I just think that it's layering dysfunction upon dysfunction, distortion upon distortion, gets us further from a stable, functional, prosperous economy than it does closer. And so it's more that when we're talking about the working class family household who may be earning $40,000, $50,000, $60,000, it's not so much that it's not that I'm saying put the screws to those people, make them pay more in taxes. I'm saying we need to figure out something here that addresses the root source of the dysfunction, rather than giving them, another $500 a year or whatever it may be. I don't see that as a solution that fully addresses what is going on.
No, I certainly agree with that. And that's why family policy is just one of the many policy areas we focus on. I think the long-term goal absolutely has to be, as you said, to address immigration, as we were talking about with globalization, as we think about what sort of education system we provide. There's an enormous amount we have to do to pursue what I think is exactly our shared ultimate goal of having an economy that allows people, whatever their background, to be supporting flourishing families. I think the flip side that we have to recognize is that we've been digging this hole for 30 or 40 years. And so to say, first of all, we're not going to fix all of these other things right away, even if we sort of did a great job starting on them tomorrow. It would take a long time to build the better economy that we want the country to have. And there's also a reality that some of these things there's very likely to be political movement on anytime soon. And so, both with respect substantively to the things that we can do that would address problems in this country, and also just politically with respect to what the conservative agenda should be, I do think we have to have an answer for households that, based on sort of how the distribution of income has evolved in this country, are $10,000 or $15,000 a year behind where they otherwise may have been. And so particularly when you have something like a child tax credit that isn't getting to the people who I would say in some respect we should most want to be trying to get support to, I think the conservative view has to be, let's fix that, not let's sort of stand on this abstract principle that everybody needs to be paying more taxes, when I think even as we're seeing here, we don't actually believe that.
Right. Well, to be clear, I also don't want people to be paying more in taxes. I'm saying, well, and in fact, I think we used to not have income tax at a federal level. We had tariffs, and that's where they got their revenue from. So I think to unwind the thread to all of these dysfunctions that have sort of placed, in my mind, unjust burdens on the American people, especially people who work really hard, people who start businesses, people who, they're doing everything right. And at every turn, it's another, it's squeezing them, saying, you're not really doing your part. We need another $500 for people who go and spend it on, leasing a luxury car, or they go put it in their arm. I have grown more skeptical over time that these programs work the way we want them to. I think that the Great Society by LBJ is a travesty that did not solve people's problems. It made a lot of things worse in our country. So to me, I understand exactly I understand the issue where you've got working families who are not making a lot of money. And we want to make sure that, especially when they're having children, that they are able to raise their children in a stable and prosperous and functional way. But I also look at this long history of redistributive policies in our country, and I don't like the way a lot of them have turned out. And so to me, I'm skeptical. I need more convincing, but I understand.